Welcome to a special edition of the City Managers Podcast. I'm City Manager Ed Zerker. Today we're going to talk about a serious and timely issue: police violence and racial inequity in our country and our city. I'm joined today by three accomplished executives at the city: Milton Dahoney Jr., Assistant City Manager; Jeff Barton is a Deputy City Manager; and Ginger Spencer is our Public Works Director. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So folks, it's been a long, intense summer when we think about the work we've done with COVID, and each of you has actually been on a podcast before talking about some of this. COVID, heat, economic uncertainty, and the killing of people, many black people, in engagements with police. Most recently, the shooting of Jacob Black in Wisconsin and the follow-on murder of two protesters by a young white man. So given that, let's just get right into it. How are you coping with and facing the barrage of incidents and violence that we're seeing, particularly affecting the black community in America? It affects all of us as Americans, but many times the victims of this are African American.
So Ed, I'll start. These are difficult times for us as African Americans, as blacks, as Americans in general, whether if you're black, brown, white, Asian, Hispanic. These are just difficult times. These are unprecedented times. And these are sad times. The division that we have going on in the country, all of the shootings. Went to work yesterday, went and taught in the evening, drive home, you hear about another shooting. You wake up this morning, Actually, I was up pretty late last night, so I heard about the additional shootings last night. And it's the question is, when will it stop, right? Mm-hmm. And it's sad. And it's unfortunate because it's happening a lot that you don't want to grow complacent. You don't want to say this is just another shooting and it's not news anymore, right? It is news. It's sad. And there should be some reaction. And so, we've dealt with COVID since March. We had social protests after the death of George Floyd. And now, dealing with this. And so it would be nice not to have to wake up to these calls or see this type of thing on the news, no matter what color you are, right? But there's definitely a heightened sensitivity, a heightened awareness, regardless of what side of the issue you're on. But I think we just got to continue to keep hope alive, keep working at it, keep supporting one another, hold individuals accountable who need to be held accountable, and just work together and stick together as a community.
Oh. Jeff, how about you?
For me, Ed, I agree with a lot of what Ginger said. I think it's time to have an honest conversation. When you have somebody that has an addiction, the first conversation that person has to have is with themselves, and they have to acknowledge that they have a problem. The country has a problem. We have to acknowledge that there's a problem. There's been a long history of that problem. I think sometimes a little bit of progress, people think the problem's erased. Mm-hmm. We elect a black president, we think everything's fine. But what we've seen over the last 4 years is that election of a black president has awoken something that has been asleep for a long time and has been silent, but racism is still there. I've experienced racism recently. It doesn't stop. Just because you reach a particular status in life or a position at the city or anywhere in life, it doesn't go away. And so you have to have an open conversation and open dialogue, and that means listening. That means not just reacting. That means you have to listen to what people have to say. Mm-hmm. And I find now that people are just so entrenched in their particular corner. It's polarized, but you have to break down those walls, and you have to be honest, both sides, that we've got a problem, and you're never going to fix it unless you acknowledge the problem.
Thanks for that, Joe. Milton?
So for me, it's a question of, is this watershed moment going to be different than other watershed moments we've been to? I've lived long enough to have seen 4 little girls blown up, and people thought that was a watershed moment. And Dr. King being killed, coming from Louisville, Kentucky, where Dr. King's brother pastored a church. As a child, I saw Dr. King not knowing who he was or what he was doing. But there's just been so many things over so many years, and this feels like a watershed moment. And the country is grappling with what to do about it. So, like Jeff, I have seen racism and experienced it myself in my life. When I was a child, I saw my mother arrested by a white police officer. My mother is barely 5 feet tall, but she got to a point where she wasn't going to take his abuse and defied him to arrest her, and he did. And so I've grown up with different things like that. The other thing is, and I'll cut to at least how I see it, no one is saying that a person committing criminal activity shouldn't be arrested. No one is saying don't take the person into custody. But questions are being raised about, is it necessary in doing that they get shot 7 times in the back? Is it necessary when doing that to put your knee on someone's throat and they can't breathe and then they die? That's the distinction. It's not let criminals run free, but it's take them into custody and let's use the judicial system that we're touting.
Yeah.
And that's an excellent point, Milton, because again, you have an example of that. Kyle Rittenhouse, right? He's walking down the street.
The young white man who shot and killed, murdered people.
He's walking down the street, long rifle in hand, crowd chasing after him. He's people saying he shot someone. He walks past not 1, not 2, but 3 SWAT cars. They let him go. He turns himself in. Yet Tamir Rice, 12 years old, playing with a gun, he doesn't get that time. He gets shot. He gets killed. It becomes frustrating. It becomes very frustrating. And you mentioned watershed moments. I think the thing that's different this time, the 60s, we were still afraid. And I apologize for my voice trembling. This is kind of real. The 60s, we were still afraid. Jim Crow, just removed from slavery. We're not afraid anymore. We're not. That's the difference.
So people are standing
That's the difference.
different. So Milton, you brought up something interesting. So just with your life, this full circle for you, as a young man, you saw your mother face that abuse. You now are the boss of the police department. You know, as assistant city manager, they report to you. Each of us as city employees have fellow city employees who are police officers. Jeff, you've worked closely with police on the budget. Ginger, you've worked closely with police in public works. How do you make sense of that relationship with police officers, having the life experiences that each of you has, and you relate now to police officers as colleagues, as friends, as superiors, as how do you reconcile that?
For me, it's really not that difficult, because just like we have grown up saying to broader America, don't try to judge an entire race of people under any circumstances. Well, I have to live by what I say. I do not try to judge the entire segment of law enforcement in America as the same. There are officers who make egregious acts and they have to be held accountable. That doesn't mean I'm anti-police, but it does mean they have to be held accountable when they do wrong. And to operate from a mindset that the police never are wrong or are always wrong is not consistent. To me, I don't see it that way.
Yeah.
So I have had extraordinary relationships with police in multiple cities, but I have also been involved in the discipline of police officers and firefighters. I've been involved in the removal of 2 chiefs. So if you're wrong regardless. And it's not a race thing. It's a fairness and objective thing, and it's dealing with people in a straight up fashion. And for what works for me, Ed, regardless of who it is, I'm straight with people. I have the same answer for whoever is asking me the question. And at least people will respect me for that, even if they don't agree with the answer I'm giving. So I'm not going to give you, the bend, fold answer, and I'm making it up as I go. It's the answer. And you earn respect when you give it. Mm-hmm. And that's how I try to live my life. And to just follow up on something Jeff said, and it's unfortunate that we've had some of these experiences, but years ago, one of my sons was going to the prom, and he came home and said, Dad, I'm going to prom, and, all that goes with it. And he showed me a picture of the girl he was taking, and she happened to be white. And I had to ask him, does her father know that you're taking her? And he says, well, Dad, what do you mean? I said, you need to go to her and ask her, is her father going to be okay with it? Because if he isn't, we need to know that right now, not on the night when you go pick her up. That's the kind of stuff that black fathers have to talk to their kids about.
Right.
It just is.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree, Milton. That broad stroke brush approach, it doesn't work. You treat people as people. I mean, some of my closest friends and my closest colleagues are sworn, police and fire. People I have the utmost respect for. It's the person. It's not the uniform. It's the person. It's just, they like to say, and people like to say, one bad apple doesn't spoil the batch. The same goes for the officer, but the same also goes for the protesters. Don't paint all protesters as bad because there's one bad element. This country is founded on protest. From the day we threw the T in the Atlantic Ocean, this country has been founded on protest. And protest is the way this country understands change.
Ginger, jump in here.
So, Ed, as you know, I'm a native.
You're Phoenician. You're
Yeah.
Alhambra High School.
Alhambra High School. So I grew up in South Phoenix, went to high school in West Phoenix. My first, memory of police interaction in Phoenix had to deal with the Rudy Buchanan case, right? Did not know him personally, but as a teenager, right, heard of this.
And so just for history, Rudy Buchanan in the 90s was shot multiple times by Phoenix police.
Yes.
And it led to one reform movement in the Phoenix Police Department. So you were aware of that in the 90s.
Yes, as a teen. I was in high school, right? But the thing about that was just be careful with your interactions, right, with the police department. And that's just, as Milton said, we have to train our children, right, our boys and our girls, how you interact with the police. You've probably heard the term survive the stop, right? I'm not sure if other children, non-black children, are taught that. But anyway, fast forward.
Just for the record, I did not have to teach my two daughters survive the stop.
Survive the stop.
Right, so that's the
Right?
difference
Yes,
in how we experience the world.
that's right.
Right.
If you're asked to put your hands up, put your hands up. Don't be combative, Make sure you have your ID. Make sure you have your insurance. Just do what you're asked to do, right? As Jeff and Milton said, I experienced racism, growing up here in Phoenix, being a track star, right? But still being called the N-word by non-blacks. But, still ran my heart out, still helped the school. Went to ASU as part of a program that was for minorities to help us, as a first generation college students, so to help us transition to college. And there was a group of brown and black kids and one Asian kid, and we got stopped by the Tempe police at the time. And again, for no reason. We're just going back to our dorms. And luckily, we had one white student that was with us at the time as well. And she was like, hey, officers, what's going on? What's going on? And then it calmed down. But we don't know what would have happened if she wasn't there with us. But we all did make it home safely. So as a City of Phoenix employee, though, I did have the opportunity to work very closely with the police department when I oversaw the Family Advocacy Center, which was a one-stop shop for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, working very closely with police. And as the gentleman said, police officers are people just like we are. They have families just like we do. They have children just like we do.
They want to go home.
They want to go home, right? Just like we do. And that's all that we're asking for is respect on both sides, to be valued, our lives to be valued on both sides. I have a cousin who retired from the Phoenix Police Department as a lieutenant. And so again, it shouldn't be about seeing blue or seeing black, right? It should be about respect. Respect is earned. But I should not be discriminated against just because of the color of my skin. And even during these last few months, during COVID, during all the social protests, I've experienced it. You go to places just to get service, right? And you're treated differently.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that way.
And to that point, Ginger, I mean, on the weekends, we don't
Right.
dress the way we dress for
Right.
work.
That's right.
You know, I'll walk into a store. I'm a completely different person outside of work in terms of the way I dress. I
Yeah.
grew up in the East Coast, so I dress differently. I walk in the store, I'm followed.
Yes.
Again, it's not a financial thing. I can buy what's in the store, but I'm still followed like I'm stealing something. You know, you say survive the stop. My son's girlfriend is white. She's from Germany. Her parents went home for the summer. They asked my son to house sit. My wife and I are on pins and needles because he's going in and out of this house, driving their car to check on their home. We're not worrying about what the neighbors may say or someone, that thinks that maybe he's robbing the place. So we've been on pins and needles from that all summer as well. But again, I shouldn't have to do that.
That's right.
I shouldn't have to do that.
So we have been at our best as a society during some of our worst moments. When Hurricane Katrina happened, it didn't discriminate on race, how much money you had in the bank. Thousands of people got impacted. When 9/11 happened, same thing. And when COVID became something that we all feared and it was obvious that anybody could be impacted, we have pulled together to try to respond to it. Doesn't matter what you look like, what rank you hold in the organization, we're all trying to work together. And I think what all three of us would like is that be the way it is every day. Even in the absence of some major disaster, let's just work together as a single community. But we're a long ways from that. And I'm not so naive as to think that we're there. I don't know if I will be alive long enough to see it. I have serious doubts that I will, but maybe some other people that work here will see better. And that has to be my hope.
Yeah, I was reminded as you're talking of a training we had. They did a question. They said, I think the question you had to divide yourself up on a spectrum of whether you believed it completely or disbelieved it completely or somewhere in between was basically, can the country overcome the issues of racial inequities? And I remember putting myself in one place because the question was, can we? And so I said yes. But if the question was, will we? I would have answered that question differently. So I think you captured, Milton, there's a difference between can we? Of course we can. We know as Americans in our history, as you said, we can do lots of things. The question we have is, do we have the will to do it? So each of you have a span of your life where you've shared some of your experiences. And I don't know if you would say over your lifespan, if you've seen progress, probably it's not just a one answer. How do you think about that in terms of the will of the country, even the will of our organization to make positive and lasting change in race equity and race relations? That's a mouthful of a question.
That's a big question. You know, I think for me, growing up in the Northeast and then going to college below the Mason-Dixon line in the South and seeing the change, and even in Atlanta, where I went to school, right outside of Atlanta, there's a county, Forsyth County, where you can't even be black to go through it. To me, racism is not something that is natural. Racism is taught. You go to the playground in kindergarten, those kids play with everybody. You ask a kid when they come home, who did you play with? Oh, I played with such and such, you know, with the long hair, and they were really nice. They don't mention color. They don't mention color until it's taught to them. So from a human nature standpoint, it's possible. But again, the will. I think there are elements within the country that don't want it to get better. And so from that perspective, I don't have as much hope as probably most people do, unfortunately. I do see hope in our younger generation, because I think our younger generation are an extension of that kindergartner. They don't see color. They don't see color, they don't see gender, they don't see preference, they don't see sexuality. You know, they are accepting of all. And so our hope is the younger generation, as long as they're not influenced by an older generation that is jaded and indoctrinated in an old way of thought.
Yeah.
I have seen a lot of progress made, and I think there's some progress that's going to be made right now. One of the things that Jeff said triggered something. I participated in organized athletics all the way through college, and I played on teams with people that were very different from me. We had a common goal. We figured out how to work together, even though we were very different people. So I know that there are situations where things can happen, and I'm not pessimistic that it can't or won't. I'm certainly cautious about it. But there is a lot of work to be done, and it's uncomfortable to talk about. It just is.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a risk doing this right here.
Yeah, it's, you know, there's probably people that will hear what we're saying, and some will have issues with it. But I think it's healthy for us to share who we are and who we have been and where we come from, and to get away from the, I guess, acts of officers and that sort of thing. We have to make more progress in terms of our belief of success. What do I mean by that? When I was in school, in high school, I had a guidance counselor who I liked, but he always encouraged me to aim low instead of aiming high, because he wasn't sure I was smart enough to be able to do what I wanted. And what I'm saying is, we want schools and teachers to encourage our kids to aim high like everyone else.
That's right.
Don't think that you have to take the lowest job and you can't do things. You can do anything.
Yeah.
And getting at that is another element of eliminating some of the systemic problems that we have.
So how do you as a leader, Jeff, and bring Ginger in here, how do you as a leader in the city of all employees encourage that aiming high? How does that impact who you are as a leader in the city today?
Yeah.
You want to go first, Ginger?
So, well, just I guess to rewind just a little bit. So the reason that my family actually came to Arizona from the Midwest, from Missouri and every places back east like Ohio, was I had a great uncle. His name was Hugh G. Rice, and he was a sharecropper. And he came out here to Arizona to be a sharecropper. He saved up his money, and this was back during the time in Phoenix, when Phoenix was segregated. He saved up his money to open up a hotel in downtown Phoenix off of 5th Street in Jefferson for blacks at the time. So if you were coming to the military, you needed a place to stay, or if you wanted to go someplace to hear some good music, you would go to the Old Rice Hotel. When he sent for his family members, who included my grandmother and my great aunt, who are now in their 90s, when they arrived here in the big city, Phoenix, back in the 1920s, they were told that Phoenix was a place of opportunity. And so that has always been instilled in us, in my family, that Phoenix is a place of opportunity. And so we've always tried to be optimistic in that. And so you ask, How do I feel like where we're at today? It's sad because why are we here having to have this conversation, right? When we did that exercise, Ed, I was trying to be hopeful, right? Keep hope alive, right? But I was kind of on the other side of, yes, we can, but do we have the will?
The will.
So even as a young girl, I remember in seventh grade, a teacher told me and my girlfriends, "You'll never amount to anything." Why do you tell young students that? Young black and brown girls, why would you tell them that? And funny enough, when I got promoted into management, that teacher was still around, and she told my family members, "Oh, I knew she'd always turn out to be great. She'd be awesome." Really?
Yeah, you remember different.
Yeah, I remember differently, and I'm glad I didn't let that stop me. I think as leaders in the organization, we are here. We're here to serve. We're here to do a job. We want everyone to rise to the occasion, right? We want all of our employees to strive, right, for excellence. I think, though, when it comes to blacks or when it comes to minorities, we just want the same opportunities, no more, no less, to be able to compete, right? To be able to earn our fair share, to be able to come to work each day, to be valued, right? And to go back home to our families and be safe. And I think that's what all employees want at the end of the day. And so really, I'm still hopeful. Again, that's ingrained in me. But I think the way we get through this is by working together, by being honest, right? And keeping that goal, right? Let's not settle. And that's how I look at it from a leadership perspective.
So as I've had a chance to talk to African American employees in the city, I hear fatigue,
Yes.
and I hear hope, and I hear frustration, and I still hear some hope, and I'm always amazed at that hopefulness. How do you reconcile all those things? We'll wrap it up here.
And
It's not always hope, right? It's not like, oh, it's all going to be good, and so we don't have to do anything.
No.
There's work that has to be done. What's the work? Maybe.
Well, Ed, I think I'd start off by saying, by nature as a people, we are hopeful people. When we were on the bows of slave ships, we were still praising God. So by nature, we are hopeful. That won't come out of us. That's who we are. I think what needs to be done is we need to, again, it feels for some African Americans that work in the organization or elsewhere that they have to run twice as fast. They can't make a mistake where others are forgiven for same or similar mistakes. We've got to do away with that. We've got to acknowledge that that problem exists. We've got to acknowledge that there is talent outside of what we're comfortable with. But I think for us, we've got to mentor. We've got to find folks and pull them up and give them exposure and opportunities to be seen, to not just be blended into the crowd. We have to serve as an example. You know, when I went to Morehouse, there's a speech that Benjamin Elijah Mays gave to a graduating class, and it says that there's an air of expectancy at Morehouse College. It's expected that the student who enters here, no man will ever dismiss you with the wave of a hand. That's the way I carry myself, and that's the way I try to inspire other African American employees and youth, for that matter.
Great.
We have nearly 15,000 people that work for this government, and we have all chosen public service. We come from different walks of life. We have different experiences. We chose public service. We're here to serve others and help the community get better. We have a great organization of employees here, but we are also members of communities, and we have issues to work through. Take setbacks and whatever else and turn them into opportunities and strengths. And I'll share a quick story with you. I have developed a reputation for being a good public speaker. That skill set was developed from something negative. In elementary school, I was one of the students that integrated the Catholic school system in Louisville, Kentucky. And I came home so excited because I had a part in the Christmas play. And I told Mom, I got a part in the play. And she said, "Oh, really? Well, what part do you have? She called me Milton Jr. What part do you have, Milton Jr.? Mom, I get to be a slave. I'm going to be Black Sambo in the Christmas play.
Oh, my goodness.
And my mother said, hell no, come on. And so she made me look in a mirror over a period of years and speak. She said, you tell people your name is Milton Dahoney and you're never going to play a part of a slave. And when you look at people, you open your mouth and you project and don't be apologetic for it. And that was the start of me getting comfortable talking in front of crowds. So I was in that Christmas play, not as Black Sambo, but I played the part of Milton Dahoney Jr. And that's who I told them I was. And they applauded. I'm 7 years old, and I'll never forget that. So you can take a negative and build from it. And we have a lot of negatives going on right now. We got to figure out how to build from it. And before we end, I want to thank you for having this conversation because you didn't have to.
That's right.
That's true.
And I want to thank Jeff and Ginger for being open, because sometimes you just don't want to talk about it. There's a lot going on. COVID's wearing people out.
That's right.
But there's also this going on, and we got to deal with it.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for being here, being vulnerable, being real, and having this dialogue with me. I feel honored to have been part of it. This is not the end of something, it's the beginning of something. We're going to have these difficult conversations. We have to have these conversations as an organization, as employees. We're going to have opportunities for people to learn this fall and into next year, into 2021, because you've given the inspiration, you've given the challenge that we can do it together, we can take negatives and make them into something positive. But to go back to Jeff, it's not just because we want to be happy, it's because we're willing to work at it. So again, thank you all for joining me on this important discussion about race and police and just life experience in the city of Phoenix. Milton Dahoney Jr., Assistant City Manager, Jeff Barton, Deputy City Manager, Ginger Spencer, Public Works Director. We're going to continue to have these conversations, opportunities for employees in the city to be educated and learn more throughout the fall and into 2021. Thanks for joining me today. Stay safe and be well.